I'd like to welcome and introduce Chen Admati, who is the head of Intel Pharma analytics platform. And she's going to talk today about how at Intel we are improving Parkinson's disease research and care using AI.
Okay, so hello, good afternoon. As Einat said, my name is Chen Admati, and I work for Intel in the Advanced Analytics unit at Intel. And in the last few years, I have the privilege to lead a unique activity at Intel that is building a platform for pharmaceutical companies who would like to digitize their clinical trial and collect data from patients during clinical trial, and using all of the data that is collected while the patients are at home, leverage tools like machine learning and deep learning in order to generate some new insights. And today I'm going to talk about how we apply that platform in the Parkinson's disease space, what are the algorithms that we have developed in order to better quantify the progression of the disease. So I will talk a little bit on I will start with some background, explain the process of collecting the data, and then the modeling methods that we have used. Okay, so a few words on Parkinson's disease. I'm sure that most of you have heard about the disease. Today, the estimate that it affects between 7 to 10 million patients around the world. Hard to tell because sometimes it's misdiagnosed as other movement disorders. And the fact is that there is no cure. All of the treatments that are available today are focused on improving the quality of life for those who suffer from Parkinson's. There are a lot of pharmaceutical companies today that are trying to develop drugs that will change the course of the disease, slow it, and perhaps cure it in the future. But today, as of today, there is no cure. And the symptoms that are associated with the disease are different. There are the ones that are the most famous one is obviously the tremor and a lot of motor related disorders. One example is the slowness of the movement, that as the disease progresses, this is something that most patients mostly suffer from. Another important symptom is called dyskinesia, which is actually a side effect of when starting to treat Parkinson. It causes for involuntary movements. And as well as there are other movement aspects like balance, gait, asymmetry, and so on. In addition to that, there are additional symptoms that Parkinson's disease patients are suffering from. Cognition is one aspect of it. Over time, Parkinson's disease patients are likely, similar to Alzheimer's, to suffer from a cognition decline, a cognitive decline. And speech is another aspect. Parkinson's disease patients often, you can notice from the way that they are speaking that there is a decline in the disease, and I will talk about a little bit on that towards the last part of my presentation. So when there is a suspicion of Parkinson's disease patients, when he or she are coming to the neurologist, either for diagnosis or for tracking the progression of the disease. Today, the golden standard in order to measure the progression of the disease is called UPDRS, the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. And the way that is being done, the patient will come to see their neurologist every few months, and then the clinicians will do two things. First of all, the patients will be asked to fill out some kind of form of a questionnaire in order to assess the progression of their disease and how it affects their daily living. And in addition to that, the physician will ask, or the clinicians will ask, to perform different tasks. For example, touch the finger at the nose, rotate the hand, do some kind of a walking task. Then the clinicians will look on the patient and provide a score between a 0 to 4, 0 mean no impact, 4 almost a full disability. And this is the way that the progression of the disease is being tracked for almost 200 years since it was first declared as a well-known disease. You can understand how it's obviously an insensitive scale and how much it's almost impossible to detect slight changes in the condition of the disease, as well as different clinicians will rate the same patients differently. The scale is insensitive, but at the same time, there are some guidelines, there are things that are being defined on how to score the UPDRS, but it's subjective completely. And therefore, we see a lot of variance when different clinicians are scoring the same patient. When trying to, for example, to prove the efficacy of a new drug, being the need to use such an insensitive scale is something very problematic, and it's making the research and also the development of new drugs, being able to prove that it actually works, a very hard task. In addition to that, when patients are coming to see their clinicians, there is also what's called a white coat syndrome. I assume that some of us experience that we are coming to the doctor and we want to demonstrate that we are in good health, that we are healthy. And when they're performing their task, they are trying their best to do it as best as they can. So the one snapshot at a time when they're coming to see their clinician is representative of the real situation and how they are functioning in their day-to-day. And last but not least, I talked about it earlier, the fact that a lot of that scale is relying on feedback. If you will get, when some of you probably went to the hospital and someone asked you, well, what is the level of pain between 0 to 10? You know, if some people will say 2, some will say 6, and you know, we cannot tell if it's the same or completely different thing. So these are the challenges that leveraging the existing methods exist, and this is what we try to change. So as I said, my team and a lot of the people are here in the room, and the credit goes to them, developed a platform that enable us to collect data from patients at home using sensors. All of that data is streamed 24/7 and stored in the cloud and available to generate insights out of the data that is coming. You know, the mission that we wanted to accomplish is to develop digital outcome measures, replacing so-called the UPDRS. No need to a clinician to rate the severity of the different symptoms that today are being done manually, but just using an objective data that is collected from sensors and being able to translate that into a reliable objective score using machine learning algorithms. And the way that we have done it, as I said, we have the data platform that enables us to conduct studies and collect the data. Then we defined research studies, clinical trial, where we have a given protocol. We know exactly what data we would like to collect. We are using experts in order to generate the labels that later on we will train the data. And then the last phase was the development of the algorithms. And I will share here 2 examples, one for symptoms detection and one for symptom scoring. And we will see some results on that as well. So let's start with the data collection. So what data we collected? So we used a watch equipped with accelerometer, a gyroscope, paired with a mobile app that we had developed internally as well. And the idea was that the watch will be placed on the wrist 24/7, collecting data in a passive manner, and together with the app that will collect also feedback from the patient, as well as instruct the patients to perform all kinds of tasks similar to the ones that are conducted in the clinic while the patient is at home. The data that we have collected is divided into two data sets. The first one is the one that we are collecting in the clinic. In the clinic, we have experts, we have clinicians that have done that work for forever, and they know to look on a patient and to say, well, this is the severity of the symptoms that we currently see. So when the patients were in the clinic, they performed the task. We recorded those tasks using the smartwatch, collected the accelerometer data, and as well as the expert rating. And they perform different tasks. Some of them are the ones that are typically are being done as part of the UPDRS that I described, as well as tasks that are more describing real life, like folding towels, drinking from a cup, going upstairs, and so on. And this is what created our training set. In addition to that, we had the patients going home with the app and the smartwatch, living their day-to-day. We did ask them to perform some tasks and to provide some feedback, but this was our image of their free living, and later on was used as for our validation. When starting to analyze the data, we encountered in different challenges. We heard in the different lectures that we had today in this track. Similar, we see that in different domains across the healthcare sector when talking about the data. But the three key challenges that when modeling our algorithms that we needed to address was, first of all, the unreliable labels. There is some kind of a paradox, the fact that we are using experts to provide labels. At the same time, we know that they're insensitive and they're not necessarily accurate, and there is variance between clinicians. So this is problem number one. There are a lot of cases where our data science team looked at the data. We can clearly see a signal, and at the same time we see a zero score. And so obviously a very challenging thing to overcome when modeling the data. The second thing is the imbalance labels. Obviously, when talking about different symptoms, the labels are not, it's hard to recruit people that are suffering, that are in advanced stages of the disease, and therefore we see an imbalance of our labels. You can see how much in some of the cases. So being able to address that was the second challenge. And the fact that the majority of the data that we have is obviously unlabeled. I talked about between the tasks that are collected in clinic versus the ones that the passive free living data that is collected from home. Obviously, we have a significant, much more data that is unlabeled versus the one that it is. So the next stage was starting to analyzing the data and prepare it for our modeling. There are a few stages of data preparations that we have done. First of all, as I said, we have a lot of labels that are very noisy. Some of them, in several iterations, we cut from the data because we saw that it's confused the training model, and we had videos also. So in cases where we see discrepancies between the scores and the videos, we reduced some of the tasks. There are obviously we're talking about accelerometer data. A lot of the features that we have extracted are in the time and frequency domain. So there are some, for example, known frequencies when talking about tremor, for example, between 3 and 10 is known to be a frequency that is associated with tremor. So in some cases where we wanted to reduce that noise, we filtered them out. We collected the data in 3 axes. So reducing the dimensionality in tasks, where, for example, when I'm doing finger to nose, the y-axis is meaningless and therefore can be reduced in order to simplify the task. And something that was very important for our deep learning model that I will present in a minute, the data augmentation, generating additional data from existing data, rotation, permutation, in order to generate much more data than the ones that we had. From a feature perspective, we had 3 types of features. We have a feature that were extracted on the raw data that was coming from the accelerometer. There was a transformation for the frequency domain and extracted a feature from that domain. And also the spectrogram that will be used as an input for the covenant that I will talk about in a minute, which enable to keep the time as an input. We always looked on a certain window or a certain task, and the fact that we can see, for example, in this example, you could see a temporal halt that is relevant for one of the symptoms that we try to model. So the fact that the spectrogram enable us to remain, to keep the time as a dimension was something that significantly improved the results. So the first algorithm that I'm going to talk about is the symptom scoring. The purpose of this algorithm is to so-called replacing what the clinicians are doing while the patients are in the clinic performing structured tasks, meaning predefined tasks, walking, hand rotation, finger to nose, and so on. So these are our inputs, and our labels are the experts that we collected while the patients were in the clinic. We used here hierarchical models, stacked models, in order to, because one of the purposes that we wanted to ensure is the fact that we are talking about ordinal scoring. So we used XGBoost and in 2 different types. One of them is hierarchical, and the second one is 2 types of models, and then some kind of a fusion in order to decide. If you remember, one of the challenges that I was talking about is the fact that we have the labels are completely imbalanced, and we had very little examples above 2. And the fact that 2 is already considered to be relatively late stage at Parkinson's disease. So one additional thing that we have done is group together the 2+, and that later on will be continued to do more work on that specific group. The second algorithm is the symptom detection, and this is aiming for free living, the ability to know generally what is the percentage of the day a patient is suffering for certain symptoms. So the thing that the goal of those algorithms is to detect in a certain time window if the symptoms exist or not. So here, we have used a deep learning model where the spectrogram that I was talking about earlier was used in order to train the fully connected layer, as well as some of the features that we extracted from the frequency domain and from the raw data that was added to that, and that was used in order to binary score between 0 to 1 and being able to detect the different symptoms. So with that said, to summarize, I think that one of the main conclusions of the work that we have done, and I will talk about in a second on some of the future direction that we believe in order to improve results or to add additional dimensionality to the work that was done. First of all, I think that it's clearly demonstrate the ability to use consumer devices where the patients are at home. Most of us are using some kind of a wearable smartphone. It's obviously a commodity, and we can use those kinds of devices in order to significantly improve research, care, and the second one is the fact that what we have learned over the years and from one study to another is the importance of how you are designing a clinical trial, so the way that you are collecting the data. The more properly designed trial and be able to train the clinician on exactly how to collect the data, video the patients, and so on, significantly later on enable us to do better job as data scientists in order to produce those algorithms. Before concluding and opening for questions, I do want to share some future direction on how additional symptoms can be used in order to objectively quantify. So at the left side, we can see some proof of concept work that we have done using video. As I mentioned at the beginning, gait is, walking is something that is very impacted for Parkinson's disease patients. In many cases, these are the first time that the disease is being noticed. So being able to use computer vision in order to extract a lot of sensitive information from all of the limbs, symmetry, things that are related to walking. So within some proof of concept work demonstrating the ability to extract a long list of measurements in very high resolution using deep learning models. And the second one, I stated at the beginning that speech is one of the progression markers for Parkinson's disease. There are a lot of research that demonstrate that when the disease is progressing, speech has a significant impact. The tongue, our jaw, things that are related to the rhythm of our speech, and also, since there is a cognitive aspect, also the intelligibility of our talk. So a lot of research also in this space, and a lot of opportunities going forward. That's it.
Thank you very much, Chen. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. You've mentioned that you have imbalance in data related to stages of Parkinson's disease. Could you tell us, like the size of the imbalance, how big is the percentage of stage 3 and 4, or for in comparison to?
The graph here are actually representing real numbers, so you can see that it changes based on the symptoms, but you can clearly see these are the zeros, these are the ones in gray, and the rest are in other colors. So it's completely in balance.
No, I cannot see the number. Can you?
It's well, it's hard to see. It's 60. The bottom one is 65, and the upper one is 90.
And how do you address the imbalance of challenge?
So one of them was to do the stacked model approach, that we train 0 versus 1 And then we had just a smaller model that did 1 versus 2, and here it was in a different split. So this is one of the approaches, for example, that we used in order to. Another thing is what I told about the fact that we grouped together all of the 2+, and from a clinical perspective, it makes sense. So.
The positive labels that you don't see many instances of, are they pretty close to each other in the distribution?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry,
Yes.
to.
The positive labels that you had few instances of, are they pretty similar to each other in the distribution, or did you find them spread out in different places?
It depends. We saw both actually. So we have cases where, for example, the watch on the wrist detected a tremor from the leg. So you see different patterns, but in some cases you see resemblance in the pattern, and in some cases you do not.
Your reference for the doctors' papers, but maybe you are more accurate than the doctor, so when you go about your results, maybe it can be higher, because maybe there are some inaccuracies.
I think that you are spot on the #1 challenge in this domain. It's a paradox because from one end, your assumption is that the clinicians and the experts are, it's not accurate 100%, and this is by exaggeration. But in order to introduce a new technology, you need to be able to compare yourself against the golden standard. So it's something that I'm presenting here some work in a certain domain of healthcare. We heard different lectures today. It's a big problem to address in this domain. And yes, there are different ways to demonstrate that, but it's a challenge, no doubt.
This is essentially a diagnostic aid, right?
Yes.
There's still no treatment
No.
for Parkinson's.
No. Unfortunately, there are, as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of companies today that some of them are in advanced stages. I obviously hope that will mature.
Show us the spectrogram you were talking about. I might have. Can you just refresh my memory about what this is a spectrogram of?
So the spectrogram is the frequency over time of a certain, if it's, let's say that we are translating a certain task as our input, meaning that, that if this is the time, what was the frequency that was detected over that time period?
Do we have any last question? We can take one more.
Maybe I missed it. What was the bias from what the physician think that this is alias, and we think what was the movement of the patients? How much was it percent? 10% movements, 15%. What was the bias?
It wasn't, well, it's hard to tell because you don't know what is the ground truth, but you can see here I included here some of the results. You can see cases where there is almost a very high accuracy, so there is a very high correlation between what the experts detected versus what the algorithm said, and there are places where there are some different discrepancies. There are cases where between.
So like 30%?
No, yeah, it could be in average is around 20 to 30%.
It can kill the product.
Yeah.
Because as you say, the gold standard is what the physician thinks.
But there are some.
They need to give you the approval.
Yes, but as I said, the ability to properly design a study is very important because let's say that you have a video, then you are going back to the video and being able, and then you are reducing that. So it's an iterative process, and so you are building. being able to have some multiple experts, so you see the variance between the experts. There are some methods in order to overcome it.
Okay, thank you, Chen, for a fascinating talk.